right. Hello, everybody. Apologies for the brief error there as we're coming in. It's with great joy that I get to welcome you all today to Nature's Best Hope, an event we're doing here with Doug Tallamy, who's in the call with us today. My name is Keith Runyon, and I'm the General Secretary for Quaker Earth Care Witness, which is the sort of largest North American network of Quakers working for earth care, climate justice, and a thriving slash more sustainable world for all of life. We're delighted to be joined today by Dr. Doug Tallamy. Dr. Tallamy is an entomologist, conservationist, and professor at the University of Delaware, whose work has transformed our understanding of the relationships between native plants and wildlife. He and his wife, Cindy, were married under the care of Concord Friends Meeting. His research and books include Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope, and have inspired millions to see their own backyards as part of the solution to the biodiversity crisis. Driven by the belief that everyone can play a role, Doug co-founded Homegrown National Park to encourage people to plant natives in the spaces they care for. For those of you joining us for the first time, Quaker Earth Care Witness is a North America-based international community of friends called to act with courage and spiritual depth in the face of the climate and biodiversity crisis. We work to inspire spirit-led action for ecological justice, right relationship, and an earth restored. At QEW, we feel called to act with the same boldness and moral clarity that these urgent times demand. We believe humanity is crossing a threshold spiritually, ecologically, and morally, and that the choices made in the years ahead will shape the fate of generations. In the face of ecological breakdown, deep inequality, and rising violence, we hear a clear leading to help guide the human family towards a future rooted in humility, courage, justice, and kinship with all life. So with those words said, it's been an absolute joy to be prepping this program with Doug. I'm excited for his sharing is about this extraordinary work saving tens of thousands of acres of land for ecological restoration and for the more than human world of which we are a part. And with that, I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Keith. There we go. Well, you said it all, Keith. We are at a threshold and we don't have a lot of time to fool around. We need to act. That's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about my idea of nature's best hope, and I'll give you a spoiler. You are nature's best hope. So we'll talk about why I think so. But before we do that, let me talk about what Edward O. Wilson's idea of nature's best hope was. E.O. Wilson from Harvard. Many of you knew him well. Very long career at Harvard. Myrmecologist, entomologist, conservationist, sociobiologist. E.O. Wilson did it all. But one of the things that was consistent throughout his very long career was his love of life on planet Earth and his efforts to save it. And he wanted to save it not just because he loved it, but because he knew it was essential to our own survival. So in 2016, he wrote this book, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. And he had one simple message. He said, if we're going to save life anywhere on planet Earth, we're going to have to save nature. We're going to have to save functioning ecosystems on at least half of the planet, or it will disappear everywhere. And that means humans too. So it's a very bold statement. And he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that very bold statement. And then he ended the book. He didn't spend a lot of time telling us how we were going to save nature on half of planet Earth. Of course, to a conservation biologist, that's a great idea. We'll just put half the Earth aside, and all those things that'll be in trouble, all those things that are in trouble, it can be in that half, and we can be in the other half. And it'll be great. But the problem is half of terrestrial Earth is already in some form of agriculture. I don't see that disappearing anytime soon. And we've got 8.4 billion people in the other half, along with all of our hardscape and airports and detritus. And we don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So how can we realize E.O. Wilson's dream? That's really what I want to talk about tonight. And I think we can, but we need a new approach to conservation to do that. Now, one of the challenges of tonight's talk is that it's nationwide. So I want you to think about the concepts that I'm talking about rather than the specific examples, because what I'm talking about is relevant in every ecosystem in this country. One of the things I'm talking about is oak masts. So if you're in one of the 84% of the country that it has oaks, occasionally oaks will get together and make their acorns at the same time. And when they do, this is what it looks like. Well, I'm easily entertained. So I take one of those acorns and I just stare at it. And sometimes I'm rewarded. Here, an insect's chewing its way out of the acorn. First, it chews a little hole for its head, then it forces its head through there, then it forces its entire body through there. It's a tight squeeze. And after it is out of the acorn, it's a dangerous time for that insect larva because it's good to eat. A lot of things are after it. So it gets to safety by wiggling and squirming beneath the soil surface. That takes about 30 seconds. And once it's underground, it stretches in all directions and forms a chamber. And within that chamber, converts itself to a pupa. And then surprisingly, stays in that underground chamber as a pupa for 2 years. After 2 years, comes out as an acorn weevil. That's what an acorn weevil looks like. A lot of people think weevils have big noses because it looks like they do, but that's actually an extension of the head capsule. And the mouth parts are way down there at the end of that extension. They take those mouth parts and they chew a hole into the center of the acorn, turn it around, lay an egg in that hole, and that is how the larva gets into the acorn. Why do they spend 2 years underground? Why don't they come out the next year the way most insects would? Well, it takes many species of acorns 18 months to complete their development. So if they came out the next year, there wouldn't be enough acorns for them. Of course, after they leave the acorn, it leaves a hole, kind of like a true vacuum. And you know that nature abhors a vacuum. And in this case, she's filled it with 3 species of temnothorax ants, tiny little ants where the entire colony lives in the holes made by acorn weevils after they have left the acorn. And if scouts find a new hole in a new acorn, they get all excited because their old acorn's falling apart. So they tell everybody, time to move. Grab the larvae, grab the eggs, move the entire colony into the new acorn. That takes about 30 minutes. And once they're inside, they post a guard, make sure nobody else comes in. And that's where they'll live for the next 2 years until that acorn falls apart. What's my point with this little story? That's just one of literally millions of very specialized interactions, largely between animals and plants, that comprise the bulk of nature. This is another one, the relationship between jays all over the country, and acorns. Jays are the primary disperser of oak acorns. They'll take an acorn, and fly a mile and a half from the parent tree, tap it below the surface of the soil. The object is they're going to go back in the wintertime and have something to eat. But for every 4 acorns they bury, they only remember where one is. So for every 4 acorns they bury, they've actually planted 3 oak trees. Specialized interaction between pileated woodpeckers and carpenter ants. That's what they rear their young on, carpenter ants. So you won't have pileated woodpeckers unless you have a lot of carpenter ants, and you won't have a lot of carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make those carpenter ants. You won't have this beautiful moth, the beloved Emarginia, unless you have mistletoe. That is their only host plant for their caterpillar. And you won't have mistletoe unless you have the oak trees that support it. You want to have about 100 species of western native bees without the pollen of various species of sunflowers. And it turns out that pollen specialization is very common in our native bees. We got between 3,500 and 4,000 species of native bees, and over a third of them can only reproduce in the pollen of particular plants. So nature is a series of very specialized relationships. The point I want to make here is that many, unfortunately, most of these relationships today are in trouble. Nature itself is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we didn't take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard that the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, and he said, leave it as it is. And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. Well, we didn't leave most of the lower 48 states as they were. There's only about 5% that's anything close to its original pristine ecological condition, and they are largely mountaintops. And that's because we have logged the country repeatedly, we have tilled it, we have drained it, we have grazed it. Got 770 million acres of rangeland out there. That's 4.5 times the size of Texas, dedicated to cattle. And of course, we paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them. You can spell that any way you want. We polluted our skies, changed our climate for centuries to come. We've drained our aquifers. We've introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are running amok in our natural areas. In short, we've carved up those natural areas into tiny remnants of their former selves, and each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated to sustain the amount of nature that we humans need, because it is natural systems, it is ecosystems, that allow us to survive on planet Earth. Decades ago, Edwin Way Teale said we cannot make the world uninhabitable for other forms of life and have it habitable for ourselves. It's the most basic common sense. Yet that's what we've been doing. That's what we continue to do. And you might wonder why, and I don't know why, but I suspect we have thought that our nest, planet Earth, was so large we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. Of course, we were wrong about that. And that's why we're seeing some pretty scary headlines these days at a regular clip. These are just a few of them, like the insect apocalypse is here, talking about global insect decline. Followed by this one. North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. That's a third of our North American bird population already gone. And the UN is predicting we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years. And they made that prediction 3 years ago. So I guess it's now the next 17 years. Fortunately, it's a prediction. We have to make sure it doesn't happen because those are the species that keep us alive on the planet. It is serious business. So I could go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, and as Shakespeare would say, upon all of our houses. That's not what this talks about. This talks about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that'll take small efforts from lots of people, people like you and me, but those efforts will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return briefly to this headline. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, back to E.O. Wilson. He told us exactly what would happen if insects were to disappear from planet Earth. And he did it way back in 1987 with this paper, The Little Things That Run the World. And again, his message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, it would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our vertebrate animals would collapse. We would lose our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, and our mammals. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients. All we'd have is bacteria and fungi. And again, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. Now, fortunately, there is some good news, and that is that none of that has to happen. We can save our insects. We can save our birds. We can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape to do it. Why is that? Remember, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on the life support that ecosystems provide. We call them ecosystem services. There's just a few things that plants do every day that we depend on every day, like oxygen. That oxygen is coming from plants. Plants are cleaning our water, slowing its journey to the sea where it becomes too salty to use. Carbon capture, enormously important today. Plants are pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, building their tissues out of that carbon, and then pumping the extra carbon they fix through photosynthesis into the ground through their root systems. And once that carbon is in the ground, it is very stable, can stay there thousands of years. Plants are building topsoil, they're holding it in place, they're preventing floods, they're dampening severe weather, they're converting sunlight into food. If we lose our plants, we're going to have to eat sunlight, and then we will lose weight. What are animals doing for plants? They are providing pest control services. They're pollinating nearly 90% of our flowering plants. They're dispersing plant seeds. So designing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services is just not a good idea. Never was a good idea, but today it's a terrible idea because of those 8.4 billion people demanding more and more ecosystem services every day. Now, we do have parks, we do have preserves, they're doing the best they can, but it is not good enough. We are now racing towards the sixth great extinction event the planet has ever experienced. So I think what we need to do is start to practice conservation outside of parks and preserves on landscapes just like this. Now, there have been visionaries through the ages who have recognized that we humans needed to work on our relationship with planet Earth, and Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. And one of the things he said is the oldest task in human history is to live in a piece of land without spoiling it. There have been indigenous groups been good at doing that for long periods, but our huge Western societies and our huge Asian societies are terrible at doing that. We habitually take more from the earth than it has to offer, completely wrecking an area, going to another place, doing the same thing, not sustainable behavior. But Aldo Leopold had a lot of faith in humans. He believed we were capable of developing what he called a land ethic. He knew we had to use the land. We had to farm and lumber and graze and mine and do all of those things. But he believed we could learn to do them gently enough that we did not destroy local ecosystems. That's what he called a land ethic, and he wrote about it in the Sand County Almanac, his most famous book. What he did not write about was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why that was, but I suspect the notion that humans and nature cannot live together. We cannot coexist in the same place at the same time. That notion was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, it still remains in our own culture, unfortunately, that he might not have recognized it as an option. What I want to argue today, though, is that not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to flip that on its head and practice conservation where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. And that means we got to find ways for nature to thrive in human dominated landscapes, not hang on by a thread, not get diminished every day, but thrive. Where should we start? Private property. Why? Because most of the country is privately owned. About 78% of the entire lower 48 states is privately owned. 85.6% east of the Mississippi is privately owned. If we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail, and failure is not an option. Now, when I use the word conservation, I'm not using it exactly the way I mean. We do want to conserve any bits of nature that are left out there. That's been our conservation model for the last century, and we want to keep doing that. But again, it hasn't been good enough. So we have to move beyond conservation into restoration. We have to rebuild nature in as many places as we possibly can. Rebuild those ecosystems. And you might be thinking, well, there's no way you're going to put it back together again exactly the way it was. And you're probably correct about that. But we can reunite enough of those specialized interactions that I opened the talk with to create ecosystem function once again, even if it's not exactly what was on a particular space at some point in the past. But in order to do that, we have to start with the building blocks. Not all species contribute to ecosystem function equally, so we have to start with the most important groups, and there's two groups we can't do without. One is the flowering plants, and of course, the pollinators that allow those plants to reproduce. They are capturing energy from the sun and using it. I don't know. There we go. Capturing energy from the sun and through photosynthesis, turning it into simple sugars and carbohydrates, which is the food that supports just about all the animal life on the planet. Minor exceptions at the bottom of the ocean. So let's just say plants are making all the food and they're storing it in their parts, mostly leaves. If we don't get that food to animals, we don't have any animals. And if you don't have any animals, you don't have a functional ecosystem. Well, it turns out that most vertebrates do not eat plants directly. Most vertebrates eat invertebrates that ate those plants. Most of those invertebrates are insects, and not just any insect. Turns out that caterpillars are enormously important in terms of transferring energy from plants to other animals. As a matter of fact, they are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. That's why Dan Jansen, very famous ecologist, calls them the meat and potatoes, the bread and butter of terrestrial food webs. If we design landscapes that don't have a lot of caterpillars in them, we're going to have failed food webs and eventually failed ecosystems. Now, I'm going to use the Carolina chickadee as an example. That's the chickadee that occurs in my house in southeast Pennsylvania. And then north of us, we've got the black-capped chickadee. In the west, you've got black-capped chickadees and chestnut-backed chickadees and mountain chickadees. They're all doing pretty much the same thing. They come to our feeders in the wintertime. We tend to think that that's all chickadees need is seeds. But even in the wintertime, only 50% of their diet is seeds. The other 50% is insects and spiders, even in the wintertime. And when it comes time to reproduce, their babies can't eat seeds at all. So they switch entirely to invertebrates. And if they're in a healthy environment, they will rear their young exclusively on caterpillars. And they are not alone. 96% of our terrestrial birds rear their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. So there's something special about caterpillars. What is it? There's actually several things special about caterpillars, and one of them is that they're soft. Think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is exoskeleton. It's made of chitin. It's undigestible. And because they're soft, birds can stuff the food down the throat of their offspring without fear of injuring them. If you ever watched a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. Beak's like a plunger. They just stuff it down there. So caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. Some of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but do you want to chase 200 aphids or do you want to get one caterpillar? They're also nutritious, very high in fat, very high in protein, low percentage of chitin of exoskeleton compared to many other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages, they're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible, and many beetles have really sharp edges too. And then finally, it turns out caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. I mention carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate and you're a vertebrate and birds are vertebrates and we vertebrates cannot make our own carotenoids. Only plants make carotenoids. So we have to get our carotenoids from plants. And we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. Where are the birds getting their carotenoids from during the breeding season? From all those prey items they bring back to the nest. But look, carotenoid content is not equally distributed among bird prey. These first two bars here are types of caterpillars. They have far more carotenoids than other types of bird prey. Here are the adult caterpillars here, the moths and butterflies themselves. They have far fewer carotenoids because they're not eating the green leaves. That's where the carotenoids are. And here's the earthworm way over here. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. There's also a direct relationship between how often a prey item is brought back to the nest and its carotenoid content. Caterpillars are brought back more often than anything else, and they've got the highest carotenoid content, followed by orthopteroids, things like crickets and grasshoppers and katydids. And then all these other types of prey are brought back far less frequently, and they have a lot less carotenoid. So those studies and others are suggesting that caterpillars are not optional parts of most bird diets. They are essential parts of most bird diets. So let's just say most birds need caterpillars. The next question is, how many do they need? Is one or two enough? Or one or two a day enough? It's a good question. So let's go back to the Carolina chickadee. There's a lot of data on Carolina chickadees. How many caterpillars does it take to make a nest of Carolina chickadees? Well, one or two is not enough. One or two a day is not enough. It takes thousands. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get one clutch of chickadees to the point where they leave the nest. And that depends on the number of chicks in the nest. And after they leave the nest, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days. But they're flying all around, so nobody's been able to count them. So, 10,000 more than that to get one clutch of chickadees to the point where they are independent. That's a bird that's a third of an ounce, 4 pennies worth of bird. And if you want chickadees to breed in your yard, you got to have all those caterpillars in your yard because they only forage about 50 meters from the nest. They are not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. And if we landscape in a way that does not include all those caterpillars, that's called insect decline. And it's really looking like insect decline is one of the major reasons birds are declining. We went to the original data set of Rosenberg et al. That's the Smithsonian group who said that we've lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. And we divided the terrestrial bird families into two groups, or bird species into two groups. The species that require insects, particularly when they're breeding, and the species that do not require insects when they're breeding. So there are species like finches and doves and crossbills that can make a little milk out of the seeds they eat and rear their young on that. And those species didn't decline at all in the last 50 years. But the species that require insects declined on average 10 million individuals per species. So it doesn't prove cause and effect, but it does suggest that as you take away bird food, you lose the birds. So I think we need to raise the bar about what we're asking our landscapes to do. In the past, we've asked them to do one thing, and that is be pretty. Now we're going to ask them to do two things, be pretty and ecologically functional at the same time. And that's not going to happen unless we put the caterpillars back. So how do you add caterpillars to landscapes? Well, you put the plants that support those caterpillars in your yard. And that seems pretty straightforward. But there is a catch, and that is that most plants do not support a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be fussy about it. We have to be fussy about which plants we use in our yards, and we have to be fussy about it because the caterpillars themselves are fussy about it. And the monarch butterfly illustrates that perfectly. You can have all the ornamental plants from other continents in your yard. And about 80% of the plants in our yards are ornamentals from other continents. And you won't make a single monarch butterfly. The only thing that's going to make a monarch butterfly is one of the milkweeds. That is called host plant specialization. And it turns out that most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. They can only eat particular plants. Why is that? Because plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their tissue with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds, that make those tissues either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense. It keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world, which is why it's green out there in the summertime. It's not because there's no insects that want to eat those plants out there. It's because most of the insects cannot eat the plants that are out there. They are too well defended. But insects do eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? Well, this is where the specialization comes in. Most of the insects that eat plants can only eat plants for which they have very specialized adaptations. They have specialized enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify compounds, behavioral adaptations, and life history adaptations that minimize the insect's exposure to those compounds. But it takes a long period of interacting with those plant lineages for all those adaptations to fall into place. And once they do, the insect is locked into eating that particular plant lineage. So, for example, if you take milkweeds out of your yard and replace them with hostas, the monarch's not going to start to be able to make a living on hostas. Has two choices in that case: fly away and find milkweeds someplace else, or starve to death. And that's because there's three kinds of plants out there. There's plants that contribute energy to local food webs, plants that do not contribute energy to local food webs, and plants that remove energy from local food webs. The very best contributor in 84% of the counties in which they occur is one of our oaks. We've got 91 species of oaks in this country, and they are contributing more energy to local food webs than any other plant genus by far. Good example of a non-contributor would be a ginkgo biloba from Asia. Good ornamental tree, has good fall color, but nothing eats a ginkgo. So it's capturing energy from the sun, but is not passing it on to anything in its local food web. And a good example of a detractor would be any of the ornamentals that we put in our yards, but they escape and push out the native plants that do contribute. And we have about 3,500 species of invasive plants in this country. Some of the invasives in California include, of course, the English ivy, and this includes up and down the West Coast. And I don't want to focus on California too long because there's a lot of people from other places, but you all know what your invasives are. One of the important responsibilities in ecological landscaping is to make sure that you remove invasives at least from your property. So all I'm trying to say here is that plant choice matters. We cannot rebuild ecosystem function if we don't have functional food webs in those ecosystems, and you're not going to have functional food webs if you don't have the plants that support those food webs. And I'm going to give you three examples of how well this works when you do use the right plants, starting with what's happened at my house, our house, where my wife Cindy and I live. This is what it looked like when we moved in the year 2000. We got a piece of a farm that was broken up into 10-acre lots. Very old farm, been farmed almost 300 years, and the last thing it did was mow it for hay. So there's very, very few plants there. Our job was to restore it to the eastern deciduous forest that it once was, which we had no idea how to do. We'd never done that, but it seemed like a good idea. One of the things I wanted to try was to put the host plant of a particular species of moth in our yard and see whether that moth came and colonized that plant. See whether we could add life to our property simply by putting the right plants back. And the first thing I started with is the Canadian owlet. That's what a Canadian owlet looks like. I'd never seen a Canadian owlet before. That's what the adult looks like, just like a leaf. Well, you're not going to have Canadian owlets unless you have their host plant, which is meadow row. And we didn't have any meadow row. I'm sure it was there 300 years ago before the area was farmed to death, but meadow row long gone. So I got some seeds from someplace, planted them. They grew very nicely, but this was early on. I actually had very little faith the Canadian owlets would be able to find my little patch of meadow row. So I didn't even go out and check it. Maybe 2, 3 months after I planted it. And then I was walking by for another reason, and I looked over, and it was covered with Canadian owlets. They had found it right away. I'm still impressed with that. So now I have good population of Canadian owlets and good population of meadow row. So we've added 2 species to the property. The restoration has begun. Same story with the beautiful goldenrod stowaway. That is a misnomer. This beautiful moth has nothing to do with goldenrod. It's a specialist on this plant, Biden's aristosa, ditch daisy. We didn't have any Biden's aristosa, but I did know where there was some Biden's in a power line cut about 14 miles away. So I got some seeds, planted them at home. They grew very nicely. As a matter of fact, last year they took over my front yard. That's okay. Had to wait a year before the goldenrod stowaway found our patch of Biden's. But it did, and now we have a good population of both the goldenrod stowaway and Biden, so we've added four species to the property. Same story with the hackberry emperor. I wanted to see if the hackberry emperor could make a living in our house, not because it's the most beautiful butterfly in the world, but because it belongs there. It's one of the species that ought to be there. But as its name suggests, it's a specialist on hackberry, on celtis, and we didn't have any hackberry. There is no way the hackberry emperor would come to our yard without hackberry. So I got, I guess, three or four trees of hackberry, planted them. We had to wait 4 years for the hackberry emperor to find my hackberry, but they did, and now we have a good population of them. So we've added six species. That is how the restoration proceeded. I did not plant goldenrod. It came in on its own. And along with it came many of the things that require goldenrod, like the beautiful brown-hooded owlet, the Arcigera flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. There are 110 species of moths that use goldenrod in the mid-Atlantic states. I planted Virginia creeper. Yes, Virginia creeper. I hear some people don't like it. It's actually a great native plant. It's got good fall color. It's a good ground cover. It can climb our trees without girdling them, without pulling them down. It makes valuable berries for the birds in the fall. And by valuable, I mean they are high in fat. Our migrating birds need sources of fat, and our overwintering birds need sources of fat. And those berries come from tiny little inconspicuous flowers. You don't even know when Virginia creeper is in bloom until you see the big cloud of native bees around it. Turns out Virginia creeper is an excellent pollinator plant. So remember, when you're making a pollinator garden, you're making it for the pollinators. So if it's not big and showy for you, that's okay. I planted Virginia creeper because it's the best, or one of the best host plants for the large sphinx moths that are a primary component of cardinal diets. Things like the Pandora sphinx and its beautiful adult, the lettered sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, all on Virginia creeper. Want to see if I give the evening primrose moth to make a living at our house because it's beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. Well, again, as its name suggests, it needs evening primrose, and we didn't have any evening primrose. So I planted that. The moth did come, spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. Sometimes it's crowded in there, but it's always very cute. And I planted lots of oak trees. These are just examples of the plant lineages we have put back on our property. But I want to focus on oaks for a while because they are such important plants. This is the Bedford oak in Bedford, New York, Martha Stewart land. People argue about whether it's 400 years old or 500 years old. It's enormous. And I hear people say, well, I don't want to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. And if you can only enjoy your oak when it's 400 years old, you're right, you won't. But if you can enjoy what your oak is contributing to your local food web, you can enjoy oaks immediately. And I can say that with confidence because I planted most of my oaks as acorns, free, or 2-foot bare root whips, which means they cost $1.50 each. And immediately they started to call in the moths that make the caterpillars that run the food web at our house. Things like the solitary oak leaf miner, juvenile's dusky wing, the yellow-shouldered moth, Suzuki's promolactus, the red-washed caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth, the orange-tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the hesitant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the medium dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crowned bucolatrix, the orange-patched smoky wing, the white-blotched heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red-lined panapoda, the laugher, and literally hundreds more species of moths have come to the oaks on our property, and they come right away. This is a pin oak that's just popped its head above the leaves, and here's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that tree. You don't have to wait decades or hundreds of years for your oak to start to contribute. It will contribute right away. So the real question is, when you put these plants back on your property, does it work? Will life return? You can measure life any way you want. I'm measuring it in terms of the number of species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres and the number of moth species that they use to rear their young. Moths, not butterflies. Butterflies are just bad tasting day flying moths. Yes, they're beautiful, but the reason they're flying during the day is because they don't taste very good. So they're not adding ecologically very much. But moths are, so I've been counting them for, I don't know, at least 10 years now. Still at it. I got another one last night. But I'm up to 1,368 species of moths that are making a living on our property because we put the plants back. And we have 10 acres. Pennsylvania is 22.9 million acres, I believe, something like that. So on one tiny fraction of the entire state, we're hosting 44% of all the moth species in the entire state. And because so many of those are types of bird food, we've recorded 62 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres. Not flew by, but bred. Why am I telling you this? Well, this is another headline we see all the time. World Wildlife Fund says Earth has lost two-thirds of its wildlife since 1970. It's a terrible statistic. But I'm thinking, gee, not at our house. I am convinced we have increased biodiversity by more than two-thirds. It didn't take that long, and it wasn't that hard. We just put the plants back. What would happen if everybody put the plants back? We really could turn statistics like this around. But will it work on smaller properties? Let's say in suburbia. An excellent question. So let's go to Margie and Dan Terpster's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. They have 0.6 acres, 18 times less land than Cindy and I have. They are in the middle of a development. When they moved in, their yard was choked with Amur honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle, another serious invasive. So they got rid of that. They planted 70 species of native plants, put in a water feature that they call a bubbler, and then they started to count the birds using their yard. And they're up to 154 bird species so far, including an amazing 35 warbler species. Just to compare, we've only recorded 18 warbler species at our house. So does it work on smaller properties? Absolutely. What about urban yards? Let's go to Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. And I mean in Chicago, her yard abuts O'Hare Airport. She has 1/10 of an acre, 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. She's not connected to any natural area at all, so she's a tiny island in the middle of Chicago. She is a pretty island because Pam is a native plant landscaper and she knows what she's doing. And by the way, somebody sent a question about how to make bricks in a patio a little bit greener. The way to do that is to not worry about the bricks, but use container gardening. So you're not trying to make the bricks and the cracks between them greener, but you can put very productive native plants in containers. So what did Pam do? She got rid of her non-native plants, put in 60 species of native plants, including a water feature. And then she sat back and started to count the birds using her yard. And she's still at it, but she's up to 127 bird species, including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock. So if you haven't seen a woodcock lately, go to Pam's house in Chicago. Okay, there are 4 things we need to think about if we're going to succeed in a big way, and we need to succeed in a big way. One of those is we've got to address the amount of lawn around the country. Everybody's not guilty of this, but most of us are. We've got more than 44 million acres of lawn in this country, which is an area bigger than all of New England dedicated to an ecological dead space. Why do we do that? Well, it's a status symbol. It's a very important status symbol. We like neat, and it is easy to keep lawn neat. And we have to display our Halloween decorations. But there are 4 ecological responsibilities that every single landscape out there has. Every single landscape needs to support a food web. If you don't have a food web, you don't have a functional ecosystem. Every landscape needs to sequester carbon, put the plants in that pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to help climate change. Every landscape has to manage the watershed in which it lies, and every landscape has to support pollinators. Lawn does none of those things, which is why I pick on it. But I'm not suggesting we get rid of lawn. It is the perfect plant to walk on. But let's cut that area in half. We don't need 44 million acres. Let's take areas that look like this and turn it into this. I got this picture from Dan Getman in Missouri. Had a big lawn, and he started to put in some native plants, and he sent this picture to me. Well, let's make the math simple. Let's say we got 40 million acres of lawn. We're going to cut that in half. That will give us 20 million acres that we can restore right at home. And that's what we're going to build Homegrown National Park out of. And it'll be big. It'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. It is a real thing now, small nonprofit actually, but go to our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and register your property on the biodiversity map. That simply means We've just made it easier to do, by the way. You're simply putting down your location and the amount of area that you're pledging to be a good steward of, or you already are being a good steward of. Maybe you're going to reduce the area of lawn. Maybe you're going to plant an oak tree. Maybe you're going to put an aster in a flower pot. Doesn't matter how modest it is. Um, Put that information into our database, and then your little piece of your county is going to light up with a firefly. That's our emblem. And of course, the goal is to get the entire country, and Canada too is playing this game, to light up with fireflies. The real goal is to get the entire world to light up with fireflies. Our mission is very simple. We want to encourage people to increase biodiversity in the way that you increase biodiversity. You use the native plants that support it, you remove the non-native plants that don't. And in so doing, you're going to build a community that's sympathetic to the needs of conservation. There are real ecological products associated with Homegrown National Park, and a significant increase in biodiversity is one of them. And what has happened at our house just convinces me. I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm doing this. It's been such an astounding rebirth of life on our little bare piece of the earth that I'm convinced it works. It works pretty much anywhere. Nature is extremely resilient. Measurable reduction in invasive species. If everybody removed the invasive plants just from their property, we'd be 78% done nationwide, 85% done in the East. Not completely done, but a good first start. Significant drawdown of atmospheric CO2. Lawn is the worst plant for sequestering carbon. So if you put anything else in there, you're going to help climate change, and you're also going to start to create viable habitat outside of parks and preserves. And any bit of conservation we do outside of a park is going to help conservation inside of the park. There are also really important sociological products associated with Homegrown National Park, and one is national awareness. Not just of what the problems are, but what the solutions are and what our roles in those solutions are. We are truly trying to change the culture. We want everybody to recognize that nature is not optional. It is essential. It is essential for everybody. And I think that means everybody bears responsibility to help sustain it. We want to convert hope into action. Hope is good, but action is even better. And we want to get all of the existing conservation organizations, Audubon and National Wildlife Federation, California Native Plant Society, Sierra Club, all the land conservancies, wild ones. There's a lot of them out there doing wonderful conservation on private property, but nobody's recording it in one place. So we want to get all of that information recorded on the biodiversity map so we can see how we're doing. You know, we've got the 30 by 30 initiative. We're going to save 30% of the country by 2030. Not unless we count conservation on private property. So that's what that biodiversity map is all about. Did I mention that Homegrown National Park is free? We do not charge because we're not trying to pull membership away from other conservation organizations. We don't want to compete with them. We're all on the same page. We just want to record the good conservation work that everybody's doing. So we're going to shrink the lawn. What plants should we put in the area that was once lawn? I'm going to argue that some of them have to be what I call keystone plants. Remember what a keystone is? It's a stone in the middle of the Roman arch, and if you take it out of the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because they are making most of the food. Just 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs. So think of the keystone plants in the ecological house that you're building as the 2x4s that hold that house up. They are the support system. You cannot build a house out of wallpaper, and that's what we've been trying to do for the last century. I mentioned oaks are the best keystone plant wherever they occur, most of the places they occur in the country. In California, they support 270 species of caterpillars. Mid-Atlantic states, they support 557 species, over 1,000 species nationwide. Again, no other plant genus comes close to that. So if you do live in California, how do you find the best keystone plants where you are? You go to an amazing tool that the California Native Plant Society has created called Calscape, and that will tell you exactly what plants you should plant where you live. These are the most important plants in different areas of California. If you don't live in California, go to the Native Plant Finder and the National Wildlife Federation website and put in your zip code. And the ranked list of the most important woody and herbaceous plants in your county will pop up. So somebody asked what the best plants in Western Washington would be. That would be this list here. As you go farther north, Oaks drop out as the most important plants, and willows take over, followed by native cherries and cottonwood and so on. So the old excuse of not knowing what to plant um, is just an excuse now. You go to Native Plant Finder or Cowscape, and you do know what to plant. All right, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to use keystone plants. We're going to bring a lot of life to our yard. And if they're insects, we're going to kill them with our security light, which of course is not the goal. It turns out that light pollution is one of the major causes of insect declines around the country, around Europe, around the world. These are all the ways that lights are killing our nocturnal insects. It is a really serious environmental issue, but it's one of the very few environmental issues that's a really simple solution. You can turn your light out. Very easy. And I know you don't want to do that because you're worried about security. So put a motion sensor on your security light so it only turns on when the bad man comes, which is not all that often. Or take the white bulb out of your security light. I shouldn't say or, you should do this first. Take the white bulb out and put in a yellow bulb, yellow incandescent, yellow LED. Amber wavelengths, yellow wavelengths are not attractive to nocturnal insects. Actually, red wavelengths are the best of all, but then you would live in a red light district. But if we were to switch out all of our white bulbs for yellow bulbs, overnight we'd save millions of insects. And if we use LEDs, we'd save millions of dollars as well. Okay, the fourth thing we need to do is to landscape in a way that allows caterpillars to complete their development. Remember, we're trying to support that food web. Making caterpillars in our yard is the best way to do that. But just simply planting a tree and walking away is not going to work. And this is why. Now, I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. A few of them, like the polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. The caterpillar eats the leaves, then it spins a cocoon and hangs from one of the branches. Then it emerges as an adult. Then it does it all over again. Everything happens on the tree, and I wish everything did that, but most species don't. Most species finish growing as caterpillars and then drop from the tree and wiggle their way underneath the soil to pupate, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under the tree. And that is the problem. There is no leaf litter under the tree. We don't tolerate it. It's messy. So we mow and compact the area under the tree so that it's rock hard, making it very difficult for those caterpillars to get to safety, which makes these ecological traps. This is an oak tree. The moths will come in, lay their eggs, the caterpillars develop and drop down and die. And of course, the cement landscape is not the answer either. Now, this is what most people do. They have a tree in their yard. Had a grad student last year, Emma Jonas, who measured how well caterpillars do in a situation like this versus a layered landscape like this. This is what Heather Holm calls soft landing. So the caterpillars drop down. It's not really about buffering their fall. It's about creating a habitat that they can pupate in and complete the development. And you do that by planting a buffer around your trees. What you're really doing is keeping our big feet and mowers out of there. If we're not walking in there, if we're not mowing, we're not compacting the soil. We're leaving leaf litter in there so the caterpillars can survive much better. You can do this in all ecosystems. You want to stay away from the area under your tree so those caterpillars can complete their development. Now, there is room for compromise in our plant choices. This message is coming from Desiree Narango, former PhD student who studied chickadees in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and she learned lots of things. But one important thing she learned is that you can have sustainable chickadee populations if 70% of your plant biomass is native. Now, that means 30% doesn't have to be native. We can't tolerate any invasive species. They're just ecological tumors, and they're not going to stay where you plant them. And once they escape, they're pushing out the native plants that do support food webs. So no invasives, but there are a lot of ornamental plants that are not invasive. Remember Dan Getman? That's a ginkgo. Why does Dan have a ginkgo in his native planting? Well, it turns out Dan's wife likes ginkgos, and Dan likes his wife, so he put a ginkgo in there. Is this tree wrecking the local food web? No, it's just there. Is it going to escape and wreck the woodlot? No. It's just occupying a little bit of space. So it's pretty. I mean, I think of plants like that are just occupying a little space and being ornamental as if they are statues. So there's Dan's statue. If all of Dan's plants were statues, he would not have a functional landscape. But it's not the presence of these non-native plants that destroys food webs. It's the absence of the native plants that support it. If we increase the percentage of these, we can tolerate many of the pretty ornamentals that we have in our yards. Can native plants be used in formal designs? Of course they can. This is a Lynn O'Shaughnessy design taken by a drone 400 feet up. You do not get more formal than that, and every plant in that landscape is a native plant. Formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe every day. They love them over there. Lynn O'Shaughnessy loves them. So if Europeans and Lynn O'Shaughnessy can love our native plants, maybe we can too. Can we get a pollinator garden into a typical suburban yard like this without offending anybody? Of course we can. Just put a little fence around it. It formalizes it. It tells your neighbor it's not just a bunch of weeds you forgot to mow. It's pretty when it's in bloom. It supports several species of bees. It's not very big, could be bigger. But if everybody did it, it would help a lot. Help what? Help support pollinators. Why do we need pollinators? Well, the media will tell you we need pollinators because they're pollinating a third of our crops. The real figure is about a twelfth of our crops. And I hear people say, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. Forget the crop argument. You do need pollinators. We need pollinators everywhere, and we need plants, which is everywhere, because they are pollinating 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. How about this? California lilac, wonderful. Not only does this support a lot of caterpillars, but it's wonderful for pollinators. So are our native asters just about everywhere. Lots of options to support pollinators in attractive ways in our yards. Can municipalities help us live with nature? Yes, they can, and more of them are doing it. Minnesota has been a leader. Started years ago with a cost sharing program where they're paying homeowners to convert all or some of their lawn to appropriate Minnesota prairie plants. It's a very popular program. Pennsylvania has started a similar program. Virginia's thinking about it. So this idea is starting to spread. There's an island off of Florida, Marco Island, that is paying residents to allow burrowing owls to burrow in the front yard. This subspecies of burrowing owl is a listed species in Florida. If you allow a burrowing owl in your yard, you get paid $250, like this person's doing. And there's our friend, the burrowing owl, burrowing right there. The burrowing owl has become a status symbol on Marco Island. Everybody wants one. So this is the way the Endangered Species Act should have been written, with carrots rather than sticks. If you have an endangered species, we're going to pay you to take care of it rather than fine you if you use your property. Put a bounty on these invasive ornamentals like Callery pear. That's what St. Louis, Missouri did, Fayetteville, Arkansas, and North Carolina. You take out a Callery pear, you get a free tree replacement. Water utilities, particularly in the dry West, are giving people $100 coupons to put in water efficient native plants. And of course, the big lawn reduction programs in the far West, particularly California. This has gone up. $3 rebate for every square foot of lawn you remove in Southern California. And if you want more information on all of those programs, memorize that. All right, I think we have made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. And the first one is serious. We're starting to think that nature is optional. We like nature. We like to go bird watching. We like to just commune with it, but we don't think it's essential. And if it's not essential, when push comes to shove, when resources are in short supply, which is always, nature takes a back seat. I went to the Cincinnati Zoo. Well, I went a couple of times, and there's this wall-sized poster there, which to me epitomizes our society's view of conservation. We want to save nature, we want to save wildlife so that future generations can enjoy it. That was Teddy Roosevelt's argument for expanding the national park system. Gorgeous places, we want to save them so the future generations can enjoy it. And I get that because nature is enormously entertaining, but it is much more than that. We want to save nature so that we have future generations. It's a little bit more urgent. We've also assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. Now, we talked about that, but if we restrict conservation just to the places where there's not a lot of humans, we're going to fail because those places are now too small, there's too few of them, and they are too isolated from each other. David Quammen has a wonderful analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. That is a functional Persian rug. That is not 71 Persian rugs. That is 71 rug fragments, none of which are acting like a Persian rug. And that is what we've done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance, and I don't like that language because it suggests there's places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards, including our corporate landscapes, including our campuses, including our places of worship. You realize the Catholic Church is the largest landowner in the world? They all have ecological significance, our roadsides, even our agriculture. So, what we need to do is glue our rug back together again, folks. We've got to put the plants back. Not just to make biological corridors that allow plants and animals to move back and forth between viable habitats, but to recreate viable habitats in as many places as we possibly can where we have destroyed it. And the good news is it is starting to happen. It is starting to happen all over the place. And when it does, it'll be the first time in modern history that humans actually have coexisted with the natural world. Our third misstep was to leave Earth stewardship to just a few specialists, a few conservation biologists, a few ecologists. For some reason, we didn't see it as an inherent responsibility of everybody on the planet. But I don't know why, since every single person on the planet depends entirely on the quality of local ecosystems. So why wouldn't everybody bear the responsibility of taking care of those ecosystems? That does not mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. And if you do, it empowers you. There are more and more people who are upset at the state of the planet, but they feel powerless. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn, one person can use keystone plants, one person can remove their invasive species, one person can change their light bulb. We didn't talk about mosquito fogging, but you can fire Mosquito Joe. There's all kinds of things that one person can do to revitalize the little piece of the earth that they own, and that will enhance their greater local ecosystem instead of continuing to degrade it. Equally important, though, it's going to shrink the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problems. You will get depressed. Just worry about the piece of the earth that you can influence. If you own property, it's obvious that's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy, help a park or preserve. They're all underfunded, they're all understaffed. They will love you as a volunteer. Otto Leopold said, one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. He said that in the 40s, and he was alone in a world of wounds. No longer, though. You are no longer alone. Everywhere, people are starting to heal the wounds on their little piece of the earth, and you can as well. Robert Swan recently said the greatest threat to our planet is believing that someone else will save it. It's not going to be someone else, folks. It's going to be you. It's going to be you because you are nature's best hope. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Doug, for all of that. I think we're going to enter a little Q&A session, everybody, to get into the weeds, so to speak, and explore practical questions that some of you might be bringing to today's session. I know we have a huge range of people, from folks who've been doing deep work like this for the last 20 to 30 years of their lives to folks who might be showing up today as their first real look at some of these questions. So all questions are welcome. And I'll go ahead and just wait for hands to go up, and maybe I'll sneak a question in as well at some point. So let's go ahead. If you want to just use the raise hand feature, we'll start taking hands.
Sunfire is raising his hand there.
Yep. Sunfire.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to ask, because I know some people that work in this, whether cemeteries can have a role in being more ecological and putting in plants and such like that, and what's the best resource for them?
They absolutely can. It's funny, I'm on the PhD committee of a young lady at Temple University who is studying exactly that in Philadelphia. It depends on how they are managed, but they are green spaces, typically in the middle of urban areas. So the opportunity is large there. They're often a number of acres. So the trees that are used to provide the shade and the amount of plants that you put in there. Now, if you mow every square inch of it, it's going to be far less diverse than if you allow some natural areas. The biggest problem facing cemeteries in most urban areas is that a huge percent of the plant species are invasive. They're from other continents. So that really reduces the effectiveness. But they don't have to be. They can be removed and they can be replanted, and they could be wonderful sources of biodiversity right in urban areas.
We happen to have our meeting because we're one of our meeting houses. We have two, and one of them is located in a cemetery. And one person from our meeting is always, we can appoint one person to the board of that cemetery. That's the agreement we have with it.
That's good. That's good agreement. As long as it's the right person.
I want to bring one question from the chat here. This is from David Abaz. David, do you want to ask this question out loud or?
My question is, in our region, climate change has already caused a 2.5 degree shift. And so as you're advising, the planting of these natives, what do you feel about looking and selecting for certain species, keystone species perhaps, as the climate continues to change? Because we're looking at a 15-degree shift by 2090. So just how do you advise people on the native species shift and if that's an issue for you?
Yeah, that's called assisted migration. It's controversial. It's a real issue because the planet is warming. The problem is it's not a gentle warming. What's really happening is we have an increase in climate variability. So the jet stream that used to gently go across the country in the wintertime is going like this now. So when it goes high, it's too warm. When it goes real low, it's too cold. It snowed in Florida this year. It snowed in Baton Rouge, Louisiana last year. They got 9 inches of snow and it got down to 9 degrees. So if we start moving, and we're getting these, that's a polar vortex. We're getting them every single winter now. If we start moving southern plants up north, they're going to have to contend with that, and that is definitely an issue. Even beyond that, though, I'm concerned because if you move plants away from the ecosystem, away from the community that they co-evolved with, they're not going to be very functional. So if you move them away from the insects that can pass on their energy, they're going to sit there just as if they came from Asia. Now, it depends on how far you move them because insects are very good at following things. Small changes I don't have a problem with, but I think what's really, we have to get we have to get a handle on climate change. That's the real issue. But I am hoping that our plants have enough genetic variability in them to be able to handle and adapt to these crazy swings in temperature, rather than us trying to say, well, let's move plants up from the Gulf to Canada. That's not going to work.
Thank you so much for that, Doug. And I think we've got another question here from Catherine.
Yes, hi. Thanks so much, Doug. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. I've followed your work for a long time and admire it so much. I was just going to say that one of the things, I live in Washington, D.C., and have a very small yard with a beautiful southern magnolia that just dominates the landscape. But one of the things that I've been able to do in my yard that I think I see having a big effect is to have logs and other dead wood in addition to leaving the leaf litter around, because I just see so much life, coming in and out of the dead wood, whatever the wasp, fly, native bee families that live in burrowing wood. So I don't have to make bee houses. I just leave, I got some beautiful wood cookies from a neighbor that was cutting down a tree. So I just, I actually saw a new caterpillar in my yard today, and I think I got iNaturalist to identify it, but it's such a pleasure to see life happening.
Remember what it was?
Well, I have a guess. I'll put it in the chat so I don't take other people's
All right.
time for
Curious.
questions.
Well, it's a wonderful point. That's called coarse woody debris. And the more you can keep on your property, the more life you're going to have because there's a lot of things that depend on that. dozens and dozens and dozens of species. So good advice.
Hmm, thank you. All right, I've got one from Tara Bloyd in the chat. Tara, would you like to unmute or I can ask your question for you?
Sorry, lost the window. This is Peter, Tara's husband. I appreciate the resources. We live in, are planning on living in Corvallis, Oregon shortly, and we have some land that we are also similarly turning back from previously farmed, at least for raising hay and having animals, and were turned onto your work recently about the oaks. Are there resources to help identify invasive species along with the ones to identify native plants? Because it sounds like you kind of have to have both prongs of that approach.
Right. It depends on where you are, but in most places, yes. There's some wonderful books whose names I can't remember right now, where they'll say, instead of this invasive plant, this native, which is accomplishing the same aesthetic goal. But what I would do is this is where you can use AI to your advantage. For your county, put in your county, say, what are the major invasive species in my county? And it'll list them very quickly. I can tell you right now, near Corvallis, you've got Himalayan blackberry. It's a huge one. You've got, what is the yellow flowering one? Broom, not Scotch broom, but the other broom. You've got English ivy. Those are three of the big ones that you want to deal with. There's not in any given place. There's not that many species compared to the natives. So get to know those few species that could be right around you, the ones that are on your property, and tackle them. But that's a problem you can deal with. You just get AI to tell you what they are, and then you can look up pictures.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I want to turn it back to a hand. We have Al McGrew from Dayton Friends Meeting. Al, you're muted. Though it looks like you're muted in a beautiful area.
Okay, got it. I think I unmuted and then quickly remuted. I wanted to thank you, Doug, for supporting my my faith community here, but also for supporting my local physical community with your presentations to the Beaver Creek Wetlands Association. So thank you for that. And I'm actually at a wetland site right now, but I'm getting in the car, so I'll mute. Not so I'll mute the background noise. I mean, one of the things I was responding to, I thought David's question was very interesting, and it struck me that about the relocating species, and it struck me that. And I wonder if you'd agree with this, that that's actually a really strong argument for the kind of ecosystem nourishment and restoration that you're advocating, if it grows enough, could create the kind of network of interconnected ecosystems that would allow the species to migrate on their own. And I hadn't really thought about that before, but I just wondered what your response to that was.
Yeah, that is a really good point that I hadn't thought of either. If there is essentially a biological corridor of these plants going to wherever you're going, then you've got stepping stones, and then the things that use them will follow it. They're good examples of, for example, the pipevine swallowtail, which is a specialist on pipevine along the Appalachian Mountains. Well, pipevine is now an ornamental plant, and people plant it all the way to Virginia Beach, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, and the swallowtail has followed. So that's good point. Good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. I kind of had a similar question, Doug. I was thinking about you were mentioning about the genetic diversity, and I was thinking about which species. I know for a lot of species, we do kind of have a map of their range and whether you can like cross plot that with the keystone which ones are keystones and which ones have the range to move north, and that
Mhm.
got me thinking a
Mhm.
little bit.
You have to be careful with provenance, though. I mean, even though the species might have a big range, if you take a genotype from the south and plant it up north,
Mm,
it'll serve the food web, but it's also not going to make it through the winter. So that's an issue. That's what provenance is all about.
that's great. Thank you so much. I want to, Pablo, if you would like to unmute. I think you have a question in the chat and a hand.
Yeah, same question. Thanks so much for putting this together, Keith. Thanks, Doug, for a great presentation.
You're welcome.
I am in South Florida with Soil and Soul. We develop public nature spaces down here. But to your point, Doug, I get the logic. I'm wondering about the spiritual and the religious side of this. Is there a religious necessity to become responsible for our local ecosystem? And if so, why? Because, there are plenty of good ideas, there's plenty of good logic. There's not enough action.
Well, all we need to do is look to indigenous cultures all over the world. And many of them, essentially worship nature. And they did it for a reason. If they did not respect nature, they died out. If they overused their resources, their societies collapsed. And there's many examples of that. So there were good reasons that religions developed around the natural world in all kinds of different ways. But it was this theme. You had to respect the natural world or you were in trouble. How we lost that, I'm not sure, because we still have to respect the natural world. We're not, and we're in trouble. So, but it doesn't mean we can't start. It doesn't mean we can't start.
Well, thanks for the response. And one follow-up thought is that, yeah, maybe we lost it because religion became private and personal and decoupled from nature.
Coupled exactly, right?
Yeah, thanks.
I'll say Quaker Earth Care Witness is on that case quite a bit in our own community. So always welcome to come here to dive further into a faith tradition, our faith tradition's approach to that question. All right, I want to turn to Sarah.
Thank you. And Doug, I love what you do, and I've been following you for 5 years. My question is, what I dream of is some like brochure, pamphlet, some physical thing that I can hand to people who've just moved here to kind of raise, get the attention, raise the awareness of the possibilities that you explain so well in your presentations, just to kind of like get that started. Do you know of anybody I looked on your website briefly and I didn't notice anything like that there. Do you know of such a thing?
Go into on my website or on the website, look at some of my publications. So some of the early ones do exactly that. They're not long, but they outline it pretty well. And if you can't find it, ask me and I'll send it to you. I wrote Bringing Nature Home because people said we want something to read, and I started to write it as a pamphlet. But it's not a soundbite. There's a lot of, you can tell from the questions tonight, people have a lot of questions. So it got a little longer than a pamphlet, but I do have some shorter things that I could send you. So
Thank you.
Well, the next question from the chat is one that actually reflects a concern of mine as someone who doesn't have a lot of money and is currently renting with a small family, and is also trying to deal with the collective action problem of getting a whole bunch of people to choose to work together to do work of this sort. So I want to call on Kate to talk about the HOA.
Thanks, Keith. Thank you, Doug. Yeah, and the people thing is a big part of this. And I remember in your book that you talked to your neighbor and that they had a lawn, and you were sort of living by example, showing what you did, that it could be beautiful. But yes, I live in a 10-unit HOA, and the city was giving away trees and they gave us this elderberry, a native Mexican elderberry. And I wanted to have it, I suggested a couple spots it could be planted, and it just got shot down. They didn't want to, people were concerned about digging up calla lilies. It was frustrating. And it's beyond just obviously it's not just the plants. There's deeper issues in community. So getting communities to come together and just sort of showing, because I myself, I realized that I was pushing this native plant idea, and then I looked at my garden and I'm like, oh, I have like two, and then I have all those hydrangeas, because I think they're pretty.
Yeah.
So I understand where the people are coming from, and it does seem like it takes a while. I'm just wondering, as far as working in community, and just a little note on that, in Santa Barbara, we recently, this oil company has started drilling and pumping oil through a pipeline that had ruptured a decade ago. And I went to a rally against it, and everybody kept talking about future generations, my kids. And I was like, what about those barnacles? What about those future generations? Because I feel like the people aren't that endangered. I just want to note that. It's just like,
Yeah.
the
Well, that
endangered
that
people.
illustrates the disconnect that people have with nature. They don't get it that they need it, and it's not future generations, it's this generation. These are immediate problems. And just look at climate change. So HOAs, you can address the HOA issue. And so first of all, I've been talking about this for more than 20 years, and I do see change. So don't give up. One of the things I suggest is one of the avenues is to join your HOA and educate them. HOAs are made up of people, and they are concerned about maintaining the status of your community. Everybody wants to live in a high status community, so they make these very rigid rules that show that you're high status and protect property values. And any change to that threatens those ideas unless you point out how they don't. I mean, go back to my talk and look at Pam Carlson's yard or Lynn O'Shaughnessy's design. No HOA is going to throw them out. HOAs don't know native plants from non-native plants. They do know messy from not messy. They don't. This is where I talk about using lawn as a cue for care. You're going to have less lawn, but the lawn you keep should be manicured. That's the standard, and it shows that you are invested in your property and you're a high status citizen. So just not mowing your lawn and not doing anything, that's what people object to. So what you want to do is create beds that used to be lawn, and that's where your plants are going to be. But the lawn you keep is going to be mowed and look neat, and that's all it takes. Sometimes adding a sign like a homegrown national park sign or a National Wildlife Federation sign. They're all over the place. It tells people what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that surprisingly has a big effect. But think about the landscape you're creating and make sure it's not something somebody would look at and say, this reduces my property value, because that is what they're worried about.
Hmm. Doug, I just want to ask on top of this, do you have any experience with folks who've gotten involved in the network who were working with rental, being renters in a rental property?
Well, I get that question a lot because they don't feel like they have they don't have permission to do it. Again, well, let's say you're in an apartment complex. There's usually not that much land around it, but there often is some land with trees. And what they do is they hire professional lawn care service, and that's how they take care of it. But I've thought, what if you, as a renter, said, I'm going to adopt this tree and I'm going to put a bed around it and I'm going to take care of it, and you don't have to spend any money at all. It's now my responsibility, or may get two or three families to do that. And all of a sudden you've turned a dead area into a living area. Now you don't own it, but you're still supporting a lot of life in this landscape. And most owners of these properties would say, okay, as long as you don't increase my landscape maintenance bill. And of course, you have to do a good job at it too. But I've always said that should work. Also, if you're a renter and you have a balcony, container gardening works. You can. I got a picture in another talk of an apartment complex where every balcony is bare, which is the way it is for most balconies, and one where every balcony has a lot of container plants that are blooming on there. That becomes a valuable resource for local native bees. And there are a lot of species of native bees in our urban areas. They're hanging on. We've got to help them. But people who have absolutely no land at all can do that with container gardening.
Thank you for that. I think I've got to buy a few more containers here. Um, uh, Jim, I want to invite you jump in.
Yes, Doug, thank you. You've been a huge inspiration to me for a long time. Uh, Part of that inspiration resulted in our family buying 30 acres and restoring uh, over 25 years. We've uh, restored habitat on the property and planted prairie, and it has quite a variety of habitats. We have over 270 native species on that property, and we've donated it to a land trust. So it will be there permanently. And I also speak frequently to groups about this, but I do want to share with the group. I want to thank you for your latest book, because if you folks want to dig into this deeply and get a lot of questions answered, Doug's latest book is How Can I Help? Saving Nature with Your Yard, 499 questions and answers to help you make the next step.
There it is. Yeah.
And I have it right here too.
Okay.
In fact, I read a little bit of this afternoon.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that plug, and thank you for your story. I mean, you make my heart sing. If everybody did what you're doing, we would not have an issue. So pat yourself on the back. That's all I can say. It's just wonderful.
Thanks, Jim. See Ellie's hand here. Ellie,
Hi.
you wanna?
Yeah, I live on Cape Cod and we have a huge, beautiful 400-year oak tree in our backyard. You'll be happy to hear. And from West Falmouth Friends Meeting, we actually live in Woods Hole. And the thing I wanted to ask you about was predators, mammalian predators, actually in an environment where I very much love birds like towhees and ground nesters, woodcocks, and they have been sorely declining since we moved here. And I have a feeling it's because, I don't know, something's catching them, coyotes or dogs or cats or something. And I don't know if there's anything that we could do about that. That's what I was asking you.
Well, you're right. They're declining, and you've hit a couple of the reasons. Outdoor cats kill 3 billion birds a year, a major issue. So if you own a cat, try to keep it indoors. Another big problem that people are not focusing on enough is the overabundance of deer. So they are eating the understory of our forest, and that's what protects the towhee and all these other ground nesters. They're also a major part of the invasive plant issue because they eat the native plants, but they don't eat the invasive ones. And so what's left is just the invasive plants. And we've got overabundance of deer from coast to coast. And I'm not talking about minor overabundance. Where I live, there's 14 times more deer than the landscape can support, 14 times over the carrying capacity. It's about 110 deer per square mile. So it should be about 14. So huge issue. So cats, you put the cats and the deer together, and it's really hammering our wildlife. What can we do about it? If you be careful when you suggest somebody keep their cat indoors because you might get a death threat, and that's real. Don't oppose deer control issues. I mean, we could reintroduce our predators, but most people don't want to do that. No population can grow forever without causing problems. It's not healthy for the deer. It's not healthy for our forest. It's what's given us Lyme disease. That's deer overabundance. So there are many serious ecological problems that have come from us removing deer predators.
Good point. Thank you.
All right. Well, friends, I think we're kind of coming to the end. I see we have a few more comments in the chat, but some of which I thought were lovely. I'll pull out that Marianne was sharing a quote from Thomas Berry she heard in person about the written word of the Bible and the created word of God's creation being um, two things that the early church both understood as being um, uh, central to understanding the divine. And so I think that that's a sentiment we could grow more in the next decade, few decades, centuries ahead. Um, but I want to thank everybody for your time here and Doug for his time. I wonder if we can actually all just express some gratitude to Doug on the screen now for his extraordinary work and your extraordinary time with us today. Thank you so much, Doug. And I want to say that one of the things that this has inspired me to do for our whole network is as we're reaching out across the country, I'm sure Johnny did some calls today to Quaker meetings in Iowa and in California, North Pacific, et cetera, to talk to friends about getting on our Quaker Earth Action Map. One of the sets of questions is about restoring our lands, and so one of the things we're hoping to do is to partner with the Homegrown National Park movement to get people connected with the Homegrown National Park website, but also, Doug, I was learning more about some of those other resources you provided to us, calscape.org, Native Plant Finder. We'll be placing those into the web forums and into the maps so that friends can learn more about that as soon as they get in touch with us. And we're just so inspired by everything you're doing, Doug. So
thank you. Thanks for your support.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, it's hard times, but when we put our fingers in the soil, it doesn't feel quite so much that way. So
it is very restorative. You're right. We didn't even talk about that.
It's another talk.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I'm going to head to bed.
Great. Thank you so much, Doug. And thank you everyone here today. We'll see you next time. And thank you so much for your presence.
Good night.
Good night.